Ethan Carter had always been good at blending in. As the CEO of Stellar Horizon, one of the largest corporations in the galaxy, he knew how to command attention when needed. But today, he wanted none of it. Today, he was just another face in the crowd, a traveler passing through looking for a quiet meal before moving on to his next destination. He adjusted the brim of his baseball cap and checked his reflection in the diner's chrome-plated wall. Satisfied that no one would recognize him, he pushed open the door to the Cosmic Spoon. The bell above the door jingled softly as he stepped inside. The diner smelled like pancakes, burnt toast, and something faintly metallic, probably grease, from the griddle mixing with the recycled air of the colony. It wasn't unpleasant, just different. Outside, ships roared as they took off and landed at the nearby spaceport, but inside the noise was muffled, replaced by the hum of conversation and the clatter of dishes. Neon signs buzzed softly overhead, casting a warm glow over the room. Ethan slid into a corner booth, keeping his back to the wall so he could watch everyone without drawing too much attention to himself. This was part of his plan: to observe. For years, reports had trickled up the corporate ladder about dissatisfaction among workers on this planet. Low morale, complaints about pay, whispers of exploitation. Ethan didn't trust second-hand accounts. He needed to see things for himself. So here he was, pretending to be Alex Miller, an ordinary guy stopping by for breakfast. The diner wasn't busy yet. It was still early, but there were enough people to give it life. A family sat near the window, their kids arguing over who got the last piece of bacon. Two pilots in matching jumpsuits hunched over cups of coffee, discussing flight schedules. And then there was her, Claire Bennett. She moved quickly between tables, balancing trays loaded with plates of food. Her uniform was clean but faded, the fabric stretched tight across her shoulders from years of wear. Despite the stress evident, in her movements she smiled at each customer, asking if they needed anything else, thanking them for their patience. Ethan watched her closely. There was something about her that caught his eye, not just her efficiency, though she was clearly skilled at her job, but the way she carried herself. She looked tired, yes, but determined, like she had somewhere important to be after her shift ended, or maybe someone waiting for her at home. He wondered what her story was. Most people had one, whether they shared it or not. When Claire finally approached his table, Ethan looked up and gave her a polite smile. "Morning," he said, keeping his tone casual. "Can I get some pancakes and coffee?" "Sure thing," Claire replied, jotting down his order on her notepad. Her voice was pleasant, though strained, like she was trying hard to sound cheerful despite whatever weight she carried behind the scenes. "Anything else?" "No, that'll do it," Ethan said, leaning back in his seat. "Thanks." Claire nodded and turned to head toward the kitchen, but not before Ethan noticed her glance at the clock on the wall. Was she late? No, it couldn't be that. She seemed more anxious, maybe worried about money. Tips, perhaps. He'd heard stories about waitstaff struggling to make ends meet, especially in places like this where tourists tipped poorly, or not at all. Still, he hadn't expected to witness it firsthand. As he waited for his food, Ethan let his gaze wander around the room again. The diner itself was charming in its own way. Retro-futuristic decor clashed with practicality. Neon lights shaped like rockets hung beside utilitarian metal chairs bolted to the floor. Posters advertising local events, concerts, markets, job fairs were taped to the walls. Through the large windows, Ethan could see the spaceport beyond, its towering structures dwarfing the small buildings surrounding it. Ships came and went, their engines roaring like distant thunder. It was a place caught between worlds, neither fully grounded nor entirely among the stars. His thoughts returned to Claire as she delivered drinks to another table. One of the pilots called her over, waving impatiently. From where Ethan sat, he couldn't hear what was said, but he saw Claire nod and apologize, her expression apologetic even though she hadn't done anything wrong. The pilot handed her a credit chip, and she slipped it into her pocket before heading back to the counter. Something about the exchange bothered Ethan. Not because it was unusual, These kinds of interactions happened all the time, but because of how routine it felt, how normal, as if this kind of treatment was expected. Minutes later, Claire returned with Ethan's order. She set the plate of pancakes and steaming mug of coffee in front of him, flashing another quick smile. "Here you go," she said. "Let me know if you need anything." "Will do," Ethan replied, picking up his fork. Before she could leave, he added, "Busy morning?" Claire hesitated, as if deciding whether to answer honestly. Finally, she shrugged. "You could say that. Some days are better than others." Her words lingered in the air long after she walked away. Ethan took a bite of his pancakes, chewing slowly as he processed what he'd seen and heard. He'd come here expecting to learn something new, but already he felt uneasy. If Stellar Horizons contractors treated their employees like this, if they squeezed every ounce of effort out of them while offering little in return, then he had bigger problems than he realized. Ethan glanced at Claire again. She was clearing a nearby table, stacking dirty plates onto her tray. Her movements were efficient, practiced. Yet there was a tension in her posture, a weariness that spoke volumes. Whatever challenges she faced, she bore them silently, putting on a brave face for the world. Ethan admired that strength, even as it made him question the system he'd built. He finished his breakfast, leaving a generous tip under his empty plate. Then, slipping out of the booth, he headed for the door. He had more questions now than answers, but one thing was certain. He wouldn't stop until he understood exactly what was going on and fixed it. Ethan stepped out of the cosmic spoon, the cool morning air brushing against his face as he adjusted his baseball cap. He paused for a moment, glancing back through the window at Claire. She was rushing between tables now, her tray loaded with plates of food. Her movements were quick but careful, and she still managed to smile at each customer. But there was something about the way she carried herself, her shoulders tense, her steps hurried, that told Ethan she wasn't just working, she was surviving. He walked a few paces away from the diner, leaning against a railing that overlooked the spaceport. Ships roared into the sky, their engines leaving trails of heat and exhaust. It was a world constantly moving, always pushing forward. Yet here, in this small diner tucked near the edge of the chaos, people like Claire kept things running smoothly. Without them, everything would grind to a halt. And yet, they seemed invisible to those who benefited most from their labor. Ethan's mind replayed what Claire had said earlier. Some days are better than others. Her words echoed in his head, simple yet heavy with meaning. He'd heard similar phrases before, usually from employees trying to downplay their struggles. But today it felt personal. Today he couldn't ignore it. Something about Claire's tone, the mix of resignation and determination, stuck with him. Determined to learn more, Ethan decided to stay nearby. He wandered around the spaceport, watching the comings and goings of travelers. Some looked wealthy, dressed in sleek outfits and carrying expensive luggage. Others appeared worn down, their clothes patched and frayed. Many stopped by the Cosmic Spoon for a quick meal before boarding their ships. It was clear the diner served as a hub for all kinds of people, connecting lives briefly before sending them off again. By late morning, Ethan returned to the diner. This time, he chose a seat closer to the counter, where he could hear snippets of conversations between Claire and other staff members. The place was busier now, filled with the clatter of dishes, the hiss of the griddle, and the murmur of voices. Claire darted from table to table, refilling drinks and delivering orders. Despite the growing crowd, she remained calm under pressure, her professionalism unwavering. As Ethan sipped his coffee, he noticed a man sitting at a nearby table complaining loudly. "This soup tastes terrible," the man barked, pushing his bowl away. "I'm not paying for this." Claire approached cautiously, her smile polite but strained. "I'm sorry to hear that," she said. "Would you like me to bring you something else instead?" "No, I don't want anything else," the man snapped. "Just fix your menu if you expect people to eat here." Ethan watched as Claire apologized again, even though it wasn't her fault. When the man finally left, he dropped only a few coins onto the table as a tip. Claire sighed deeply, collecting the money without saying a word. It was such a small gesture, but it spoke volumes about the disrespect she faced daily. Curiosity. Getting the better of him, Ethan signaled for Claire when she passed by his table. "Hey," he said softly, trying not to draw attention. "Can I get another coffee?" "Of course," Claire replied, picking up his mug. As she turned to leave, Ethan added, "Rough morning?" Claire hesitated, then gave a small laugh. "You could say that." That guy wasn't exactly thrilled with his meal. "You handled it well," Ethan said. "Most people wouldn't have been so patient." She shrugged. "It's part of the job. You deal with unhappy customers sometimes. It comes with the territory." Ethan nodded, sensing there was more she wasn't saying. He leaned forward slightly. "Still, it's tough. Doesn't seem fair, does it? Working this hard and still having people treat you like that." For a brief moment, Claire's mask slipped. She glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then lowered her voice. "Honestly? No, it's not fair. We bust our butts every day, and for what? Tips that barely cover rent. And forget about benefits. Those don't exist unless you're lucky enough to work directly for Stellar Horizon." Her words hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. He knew Stellar Horizon outsourced many jobs to third-party contractors to save costs, but he hadn't realized how deeply it affected workers. These contractors claimed affiliation with the company but operated independently, cutting corners wherever possible. To the public, everyone was part of the Stellar Horizon family. Behind the scenes, however, it was a different story. Claire brought his coffee back, setting it down with a forced smile. "Anyway, thanks for the chat. Keeps my mind off things." "No problem," Ethan said. "If you ever need someone to listen, I'll keep that in mind," she replied with a faint grin before hurrying off to assist another customer. Over the next hour, Ethan continued observing. He noticed how Claire interacted with her co-workers, a mix of camaraderie and shared exhaustion. They joked lightly, teasing each other about bad customers or messy kitchens, but beneath the laughter was an unspoken understanding. They were all struggling. One of the cooks mentioned needing overtime just to afford medical bills. Another waitress talked about skipping meals to save money. Each conversation painted a clearer picture of the challenges these workers faced. Ethan felt a growing sense of guilt. He had built Stellar Horizon to explore new frontiers, to push humanity further into the stars. But somewhere along the way, he'd lost sight of the people who made it all possible. His company's success relied on their hard work, yet they were treated as expendable. How had he let this happen? Before leaving, Ethan struck up another conversation with Claire. This time he asked about her life outside work. "Got any hobbies?" he ventured casually. Claire laughed, shaking her head. "Not really. Between shifts and taking care of my kids, I don't have much free time." "Kids?" Ethan asked, genuinely surprised. "How many?" "Two," she said, her eyes lighting up despite her fatigue. "A boy and a girl. They're the reason I keep going, you know? Even on the toughest days, seeing their faces makes it worth it." Ethan nodded, feeling a pang of admiration and sadness. Claire wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for her children. Every plate she carried, every rude comment she endured was for them. And yet, the system she worked within offered little support. As lunchtime rolled around, the diner grew even busier. Claire moved like a whirlwind, her energy seemingly endless. But Ethan saw the cracks forming. A missed step here, a delayed response there. By the time he paid his bill and left, she looked utterly drained. Walking back toward the spaceport, Ethan replayed everything he'd learned. Claire's resilience, her kindness, her quiet strength, they reminded him why he'd started Stellar Horizon in the first place. Humanity's future depended not on technology or resources, but on people like her. If he wanted to lead, he needed to do better. For her children, and for everyone else struggling in silence. Ethan resolved to dig deeper. He couldn't fix everything overnight, but he could start by uncovering the truth. Whatever it took, he would ensure that Stellar Horizon lived up to its promises, not just in name but in action. Ethan spent the rest of the day gathering information. After leaving the Cosmic Spoon, He made his way to a small rented office near the spaceport. It wasn't much, a cramped room with a desk, a chair, and a few holographic screens. But it was enough for what he needed. He pulled out his personal device and began accessing Stellar Horizon's internal systems. As CEO, he had clearance to see almost everything, though he rarely used it himself. Today, however, he dove deep into the data, looking for answers. The first thing he noticed was how fragmented the workforce was. While Stellar Horizon directly employed engineers, scientists, and executives, many jobs, like those at the Cosmic Spoon, were outsourced to third-party contractors. These companies operated under licenses from Stellar Horizon but weren't held accountable for their practices. They promised efficiency and cost savings, but Ethan quickly realized they were cutting corners in ways that harmed workers. He sifted through payroll records, noting the stark differences between direct employees and contracted ones. Direct employees earned competitive salaries, enjoyed health benefits, and received paid time off. Contracted workers, on the other hand, were paid barely above minimum wage, with no benefits or job security. Many worked long hours just to make ends meet, often juggling multiple jobs to survive. Ethan's jaw tightened as he read through employee feedback forms. Complaints poured in from workers across the planet: low pay, inconsistent schedules, unsafe working conditions. Some even reported being penalized for calling in sick. One worker wrote, "I've been coughing up dust from the warehouse for weeks, but if I miss a shift, I don't get paid." Another said, "My family goes hungry some nights because my tips aren't enough to cover groceries." As he scrolled through page after page of grievances, Ethan felt a growing sense of shame. How had he not seen this sooner? Sure, reports filtered up occasionally, but they were always buried under layers of bureaucracy. Now, seeing it all laid out in front of him, he couldn't ignore the truth any longer. His company was complicit in exploiting its own people. Determined to dig deeper, Ethan focused on the contractors specifically tied to the Cosmic Spoon. He found the name of the company managing the diner, Starlight Services. At first glance, it seemed legitimate: shiny logos, polished marketing materials, promises of quality service. But beneath the surface, things looked different. Starlight Services charged Stellar Horizon exorbitant fees for managing operations while paying workers next to nothing. Profits flowed upward, lining the pockets of executives who never set foot in places like the Cosmic Spoon. Ethan cross-referenced these findings with public records and discovered something alarming. Starlight Services wasn't alone. Dozens of similar companies operated across the galaxy, all following the same playbook. They exploited loopholes in labor laws, avoided taxes, and prioritized profit over people. Worse still, many of them had ties to corrupt officials within Stellar Horizon's supply chain division. Someone higher up had to know what was happening, and was letting it continue. Frustrated but resolute, Ethan decided to investigate further. He left the office and headed back to the Cosmic Spoon, arriving just as the dinner rush began. The diner buzzed with activity, customers packed shoulder to shoulder. Claire moved tirelessly between tables, her smile unwavering despite the chaos. Ethan took a seat near the counter, ordering a sandwich and coffee so he could blend in. While waiting for his food, he struck up conversations with other staff members. A young man named Ryan, who worked as a dishwasher, complained about his schedule changing without notice. "One week I'm working mornings, the next it's late nights," he said bitterly. "How am I supposed to plan anything?" Another, waitress Maria, mentioned how hard it was to afford childcare. "I have 2 kids," she explained. "Daycare costs more than half my paycheck. If I didn't live with my sister, I don't know how I'd manage." Each story reinforced what Ethan already suspected. The system was broken. These workers weren't lazy or unmotivated. They were trapped by low wages, unpredictable schedules, and a lack of support. And yet they kept showing up day after day, doing their best despite the odds stacked against them. When Claire finally had a moment to breathe, Ethan waved her over. "Hey," he said softly. "Got a minute?" "Sure," she replied, leaning against the counter. "What's up?" "I wanted to ask you something," Ethan began. You mentioned earlier that tips don't really cut it. What do you do when you're short on rent or bills? Claire hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, discussing her finances with a stranger. But then she sighed, deciding to open up. Honestly, I borrow money from friends or family whenever I can. Sometimes I pick up extra shifts at another job. There's a cafe downtown that lets me work weekends. It's exhausting, but what choice do I have? And your kids? Ethan pressed gently. How does all this affect them? She glanced away, her voice quieter now. They understand we can't afford luxuries, but it's hard watching them miss out on things other kids take for granted. Birthday parties, school trips, new clothes. We make do, but it's not easy. Ethan nodded, his heart heavy. He wanted to tell her everything would be okay, that he could fix it. But he knew better. Promises meant nothing without action. Instead, he thanked her for sharing and let her get back to work. Later that evening, after closing time, Ethan approached Claire again. Mind if I help clean up? He offered. Looks like you've got a lot to do. Surprised but grateful, Claire accepted. Together they wiped down tables, swept floors, and stacked chairs. As they worked, Ethan asked more questions, encouraging her to talk about her experiences. She shared stories of missed promotions, unfair scheduling, and constant financial stress. Through it all, her tone remained matter-of-fact, as if she'd accepted her situation as inevitable. At one point, she stopped mid-task and looked directly at him. It's not fair, you know? We're out here busting our butts every day and all we get in return is crumbs. And the worst part is, everyone thinks we're part of Stellar Horizon's success story, but we're barely surviving. Her words hit Ethan like a hammer. He froze, gripping the edge of the table. For a moment, he considered telling her the truth, that he was the CEO of the very company she criticized. But he stopped himself. Revealing his identity now would only complicate things. Besides, action spoke louder than words. Until he could prove he was serious about change, keeping his cover was the smarter move. After finishing the cleanup, Ethan bid Claire goodbye and stepped out into the cool night air. Above him, stars glittered in the sky, countless worlds waiting to be explored. Yet for the first time, Ethan felt grounded. All his life, he'd dreamed of reaching the stars. Now he understood that true progress wasn't measured by how far humanity traveled. It was measured by how well it treated its own. Back in his rented office, Ethan stayed up late drafting plans. He outlined steps to sever ties with unethical contractors like Starlight Services, proposing instead to bring outsourced jobs back under Stellar Horizon's direct control. He sketched ideas for raising wages, improving benefits, and implementing stricter oversight. By morning, he had a solid strategy ready to present to the board of directors. But Ethan knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Change required courage and sacrifice. Some shareholders might resist, citing increased costs. Others might accuse him of overstepping. None of that mattered. What mattered was doing the right thing. For Claire, for her children, and for everyone else counting on Stellar Horizon to lead by example. As dawn broke over the colony, Ethan stared out the window at the bustling spaceport below. Ships launched into the sky, carrying dreams of exploration and discovery. Somewhere among them, perhaps, lay the future he hoped to build, a future where no one had to struggle just to survive. The next morning, Ethan woke early, his mind buzzing with thoughts of what lay ahead. He knew the meeting with Stellar Horizon's board of directors would be challenging. These were powerful people, investors, executives, and industry leaders, all invested in maintaining the status quo. They cared about profits, efficiency, and growth. But today, Ethan was determined to make them care about something else: their workers. He arrived at the corporate headquarters, a towering structure made of glass and steel that reflected the light of nearby stars. Inside, the atmosphere felt sterile yet imposing, with gleaming floors and holographic screens displaying stock prices and operational metrics. Ethan took a deep breath as he entered the boardroom, where the other members were already seated. Most of them barely acknowledged him as he walked to the front of the room. Ethan began by calling up holographic projections of the data he'd gathered, Charts and graphs floated above the table, showing wage disparities, employee complaints, and contractor corruption. "Ladies and gentlemen," he started, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment, "I've spent the past few days investigating conditions on one of our colonies. What I found disturbed me deeply." He pointed to a graph comparing wages of direct employees versus contracted workers. "These are the people who keep our operations running smoothly. They cook meals, clean facilities, and ensure everything functions properly. Yet they're paid far less than those of us sitting here today. Worse still, many have no benefits, no job security, and no support when things go wrong." One of the board members, an older man named Gregory Lane, leaned forward skeptically. "Are you suggesting we increase wages across the board? That will cut into our profits significantly." Ethan nodded. "Yes, it might affect short-term profits. But think about the bigger picture. When workers feel valued, productivity improves. Morale rises. And most importantly, we uphold the values Stellar Horizon claims to represent. Right now, we're failing these people, and ourselves." Another member, a woman named Patricia Wells, chimed in. "We've always relied on contractors to handle low-level jobs. It keeps costs down and allows us to focus on innovation. Are you saying we should abandon that model entirely?" "No," Ethan replied firmly. "But we need stricter oversight. Contractors like Starlight Services exploit loopholes to maximize profits while ignoring basic human decency. I propose cutting ties with unethical companies and bringing those jobs under our direct control. Yes, it'll cost more up front, but the long-term benefits outweigh the risks." The room erupted into murmurs. Some board members looked intrigued, nodding thoughtfully. Others appeared resistant, whispering among themselves. A younger executive named Daniel Cross raised his hand. "How do we justify this to shareholders? They won't like hearing about reduced margins." Ethan addressed him directly. "Shareholders want sustainable growth. Exploiting workers isn't sustainable. It leads to resentment, turnover, and public backlash. If we position this as an investment in our future, I believe they'll understand." Gregory Lane scoffed. "You're being idealistic, Ethan. This business runs on numbers, not emotions." "Emotions matter," Ethan shot back, his tone sharpening. "They drive loyalty, commitment, and trust. Without those, we're nothing more than a machine churning out profits. Is that what we want Stellar Horizon to stand for?" The tension in the room grew palpable. Ethan pressed on, pulling up testimonials from workers he'd spoken to during his investigation. Quotes scrolled across the holograms. "I can't afford rent. My kids go hungry sometimes. No one listens to us." "These aren't just statistics," Ethan said, his voice quieter but full of conviction. "These are real people. People like Claire Bennett, a waitress at the Cosmic Spoon, who works tirelessly to provide for her children. People like Ryan, the dishwasher, whose schedule changes without warning. People like Maria, who can't afford childcare because her paycheck doesn't stretch far enough." Patricia Wells frowned, leaning back in her chair. "Even if we agree with your proposal, how do we implement it quickly? Overhauling our entire contractor system won't happen overnight." "I'm not asking for perfection right away," Ethan admitted. "But we can start small, identify the worst offenders, companies like Starlight Services, and terminate our contracts immediately. Offer transitional support to affected workers so they don't lose income during the shift. Then gradually bring these roles under our direct management." Daniel Cross tilted his head, considering. "What about resistance from contractors? Won't they fight back?" "They might," Ethan acknowledged. "But if we present this as non-negotiable, they'll have no choice but to comply. We hold the power here. Let's use it responsibly." For several minutes, the board debated the proposal. Some argued against it, citing financial concerns. Others expressed cautious optimism, agreeing that change was necessary, but questioning the timeline. Through it all, Ethan remained calm, answering questions and addressing objections with clarity and resolve. Finally, Gregory Lane spoke again. "Let's put it to a vote. All in favor of pursuing Ethan's recommendations?" Hands went up slowly, one by one. Not everyone supported the idea, but the majority did. A narrow win, but a win nonetheless. Ethan exhaled deeply, feeling both relief and renewed determination. The hardest part was over, but the real work was just beginning. After the meeting, Patricia Wells approached Ethan privately. "You surprised me today," she admitted. "I didn't think you had it in you to challenge the board like that." "I didn't either," Ethan confessed with a wry smile. "But sometimes you see something that forces you to act. For me, it was Claire. She reminded me why we started Stellar Horizon in the first place." Patricia nodded thoughtfully. "Well, good luck. You'll need it. Implementing this won't be easy." "I know," Ethan said, "but it's worth it." That evening, Ethan returned to the Cosmic Spoon for dinner. Claire greeted him warmly, unaware of the impact she'd had on his life. "Back again?" she teased lightly. "Starting to think you're a regular." "Maybe I am," Ethan replied with a grin. "Can I get the usual?" As she took his order, Ethan noticed a subtle change in her demeanor. She seemed less stressed, more relaxed. Perhaps it was just a good day, or maybe word of Stellar Horizon's upcoming changes had already begun to spread. Either way, seeing her smile made the effort feel worthwhile. While waiting for his meal, Ethan reflected on the journey ahead. Reforms wouldn't happen overnight, and there would undoubtedly be obstacles along the way. But for the first time in years, he felt proud of the company he led. Proud of its potential to do better, not just for itself, but for the countless individuals who depended on it. By the time he left the diner, the spaceport outside was alive with activity. Ships launched into the sky, carrying passengers and cargo to distant worlds. Ethan paused for a moment, gazing upward. Among the stars lay infinite possibilities, not just for exploration, but for humanity to create a brighter, fairer future. He smiled to himself, knowing the road ahead wouldn't be easy. But as long as people like Claire kept shining, he believed anything was possible. Months passed, and Ethan kept tabs on the progress of Stellar Horizon's reforms. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks, resistance, and moments when it felt like the whole plan might fall apart. But slowly, things began to change. Contractors, like Starlight Services, were cut loose, their unethical practices exposed and condemned. Jobs that had been outsourced were brought back under Stellar Horizon's direct control, ensuring fair wages, benefits, and better working conditions. Ethan worked tirelessly behind the scenes, making sure the transition was smooth for everyone involved. Finally, one crisp morning, Ethan decided it was time to check in on the Cosmic Spoon. He hadn't been there since the initial stages of the reform rollout, and he wanted to see firsthand how things were going. As he approached the diner, he noticed subtle differences even before stepping inside. The sign outside looked newer, its neon lights brighter and more vibrant. The windows sparkled clean, free of smudges or streaks. Even the air smelled fresher, carrying hints of freshly baked bread instead of grease. When Ethan walked in, the bell above the door jingled cheerfully. Inside, the transformation was remarkable. The once-worn decor now gleamed with polish, the chrome surfaces shining like mirrors. Neon signs buzzed softly, casting a warm glow over the room. Customers filled nearly every table, chatting and laughing over plates of steaming food. The energy in the place felt lighter, happier. Gone was the tension that used to hang thick in the air. Instead, there was an unmistakable sense of pride and contentment. Claire spotted him almost immediately. "Well, look who's back," she said with a bright smile, heading over to greet him. Her uniform was crisp and clean, tailored perfectly to fit. She no longer looked tired or stressed, just busy in the best way possible. "What brings you here today?" "Just passing through," Ethan replied casually, sliding into a booth. "Thought I'd stop by for some pancakes." "You've got good taste," Claire joked, jotting down his order. "Same as last time?" "Sounds perfect." As Claire moved away, Ethan took a moment to observe the scene around him. Workers bustled efficiently between tables, their movements confident and unhurried. No one seemed rushed or overwhelmed. Conversations flowed easily between staff and patrons, marked by genuine smiles and laughter. At the counter, a young man named Ryan, the same dishwasher Ethan had spoken to months ago, was helping prepare drinks, his expression relaxed and focused. When Claire returned with Ethan's pancakes, she lingered for a moment. "Things are different now, huh?" she said, gesturing around the room. "Feels better." "It does," Ethan agreed, nodding. "I'm glad to hear it. How have things been for you?" Claire hesitated, then smiled warmly. "Better than ever, honestly. The pay raise made a huge difference. I don't have to worry about rent anymore. And having health insurance? That's been a lifesaver. My son got sick last month, but we didn't have to stress about the bills. For the first time in years, I feel like I can actually breathe." Ethan listened intently, feeling a swell of pride. This was what he'd hoped for, what he'd fought for. "That's great to hear," he said sincerely. "And your shifts? Still manageable?" "Oh, definitely," Claire replied. "They gave us fixed schedules, so I know exactly when I'll be working each week. Makes planning easier for me and for the kids." She glanced toward the kitchen, where Maria, the other waitress Ethan had met, was plating meals. Maria's doing better. She doesn't have to pick up extra shifts anymore, which means she gets to spend more time with her daughters. We're all just happier." Her words stayed with Ethan long after she left to tend to another table. He watched as she interacted with customers, her smile genuine and unforced. There was a lightness to her now, a confidence that hadn't been there before. It wasn't just Claire either. The entire staff radiated positivity. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were thriving. After finishing his meal, Ethan flagged Claire down again. "Can I ask you something?" he said quietly. "Do people know about the changes? About why things are better now?" Claire nodded. "Yeah, management sent out notices explaining everything. Everyone knows Stellar Horizon stepped in to fix things. Some folks were skeptical at first, thinking it wouldn't last. But now, they believe it. It's real." "That's good to hear," Ethan said, leaning back in his seat. "Because this isn't just about the cosmic spoon. We're rolling out these changes everywhere. In every colony, every operation. You guys are part of something bigger." Claire raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Something bigger, huh? Like what?" Ethan hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "Let's just say we're trying to do right by everyone who works for us. Not just the engineers or pilots, but the people keeping the wheels turning day in and day out. People like you." She studied him for a moment, then grinned. "You sound like someone who's seen a lot. Ever think about writing a book or something?" Ethan chuckled. "Maybe someday." Before leaving, Ethan slipped a generous tip under his plate, along with a small note. It read, "Thank you for reminding me why we do what we do. Keep shining." He didn't sign it, knowing anonymity was safer, for now. As he stepped outside, he glanced back through the window at Claire. She picked up the note, reading it with a puzzled but touched expression. The spaceport beyond hummed with activity, ships launching into the sky like arrows aimed at the stars. Ethan paused, letting the cool breeze wash over him. For years, he'd dreamed of exploring new worlds, pushing humanity further into the galaxy. But today, standing here, he realized something important. Progress wasn't measured by how far you traveled. It was measured by how well you treated those beside you, along the way. As he walked back toward the corporate offices, Ethan reflected on what he'd accomplished and what still lay ahead. Reforms were spreading across the colonies, improving lives one community at a time. There would always be challenges, of course, but the foundation was strong. With leaders like Claire inspiring others and workers finally receiving the respect they deserved, Stellar Horizon could truly become the beacon of hope Ethan had envisioned. By evening, Ethan sat in his office, reviewing reports from various regions. Each update brought stories of success, higher morale, increased productivity, stronger loyalty. Employees spoke of renewed faith in the company, grateful for the changes that had transformed their lives. One worker wrote, "For the first time, I feel like I matter. Like my work matters. Reading those words filled Ethan with a quiet satisfaction. He thought back to Claire, her resilience, her kindness, her unwavering strength. She had reminded him of the humanity at the heart of everything they did. Without her, none of this would have happened. Outside his window, the stars twinkled brightly, endless possibilities stretching across the vast expanse of space. Somewhere among them lay the future Ethan hoped to build, a future where hard work was rewarded, where dreams were within reach, and where no one had to struggle alone. He leaned back in his chair, gazing upward. The journey wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for the first time in years, Ethan felt hopeful. Hopeful for Claire, for her children, and for everyone else counting on Stellar Horizon to lead the way. And so, with determination burning in his chest, Ethan turned back to his work, ready to face whatever came next. Months turned into a year, and Ethan Carter found himself back at the Cosmic Spoon, this time without any disguise. He no longer needed one. Word of Stellar Horizon's sweeping reforms had spread across the galaxy, earning praise from workers, customers, and even competitors. For Ethan, it was proof that doing the right thing could create real change, not just for individuals but for entire communities. As he pushed open the door to the diner, the familiar jingle of the bell greeted him. Inside, the place felt alive, yet serene. Neon signs buzzed softly, casting a warm light over the room. Customers sat at tables, enjoying meals while chatting happily. The air smelled of fresh coffee and sizzling food, a comforting reminder of simpler times. Everything about the diner radiated positivity, a stark contrast to the stress-filled environment Ethan had witnessed during his first visit. Claire spotted him almost immediately. Well, she said with a grin, walking over to greet him. If it isn't our favorite regular, what brings you here tonight? Ethan smiled, taking a seat at the counter. Just wanted to see how things are going. Thought I'd grab some dinner while I'm at it. You're in luck, Claire replied, grabbing a menu. We've got specials tonight, your usual. Pancakes or something new? I'll try the special, Ethan said, handing her the menu. Surprise me. As Claire headed toward the kitchen, Ethan took a moment to soak in the scene around him. Workers moved efficiently between tables, their smiles genuine and relaxed. Conversations flowed easily, filled with laughter and warmth. At one table, a family played games together, their kids giggling as they colored on paper placemats. Near the window, two pilots discussed flight schedules, their conversation lighthearted rather than tense. When Claire returned with his meal, a hearty plate of grilled vegetables and roasted potatoes, she lingered for a moment. So what do you think, still happy with the changes? More than happy, Ethan replied, gesturing around the room. This place feels different, better. It is better, Claire agreed, leaning against the counter. Not just for us, but for everyone. People come in here now and they feel taken care of, like we're all part of something good. Ethan nodded, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. This was exactly what he'd hoped for when he started pushing for reforms. And how are you doing? He asked. Still managing okay? Claire laughed softly, shaking her head. Managing? I'm thriving. The pay raise helped, sure, but it's more than that. Knowing I'm valued, that my work matters, it makes all the difference. My kids notice too. They see me happier, less stressed. It's like, I don't know, like we're finally catching a break. That's great to hear, Ethan said sincerely. You deserve it. Claire tilted her head, studying him curiously. You know, you remind me of someone I met a while back, a traveler who stopped by a few times. He left me a note once, something about reminding him why we do what we do. Ever heard of him? Ethan hesitated, caught off guard by her question. Maybe, he said carefully. What did the note say again? She smiled, clearly amused by his curiosity. It said, "Thank you for reminding me why we do what we do. Keep shining." Weird, right? But it stuck with me. Made me feel important, I guess. Ethan chuckled, though his heart swelled with emotion. Sounds like someone who knew what they were talking about. Claire shrugged, still smiling. Anyway, enough about notes. How about you? What's kept you busy lately? Ethan thought for a moment, choosing his words carefully. Just making sure the changes stick. Reforms like these, they're not easy to implement, especially on such a large scale. But seeing places like this thrive makes it all worth it. Well, mission accomplished, Claire said, gesturing around the room. Whatever you did, it worked. Thanks for that. You're welcome, Ethan replied, meaning every word. But honestly, it wasn't just me. People like you're the ones who inspired it. Without your hard work, none of this would have happened. Claire looked touched, though she quickly brushed it off with a laugh. Flattery will get you extra dessert, you know. I'll take my chances, Ethan joked, finishing the last bite of his meal. After paying his bill and leaving another generous tip, Ethan stepped outside. The spaceport beyond glowed faintly under the starlit sky, ships launching silently into the heavens. He paused for a moment, letting the cool night air wash over him. Somewhere among those stars lay infinite possibilities, not just for exploration but for humanity itself. Reflecting on everything that had happened, Ethan felt a profound sense of gratitude. Claire's resilience, her determination, her unwavering strength. They had reminded him of the humanity at the heart of Stellar Horizon's mission. Without her, he might never have realized how far the company had strayed from its core values. Now, thanks to her and countless others like her, Stellar Horizon was becoming the force for good Ethan had always envisioned. Back at his office later that night, Ethan reviewed reports detailing the success of the reforms. Employee satisfaction. Rates had skyrocketed, productivity was up, and turnover had plummeted. Workers spoke openly about their renewed faith in the company, grateful for the stability and respect they now received. One testimonial stood out. For the first time, I feel like I belong, like I'm part of something bigger than myself. Reading those words brought tears to Ethan's eyes. He thought back to Claire, her smile, her laughter, her quiet strength. She had been the catalyst for change, the spark that ignited a movement. And though she might never know the full extent of her impact, Ethan vowed to honor her legacy every day. By morning, Ethan was already planning his next steps. The reforms had succeeded on a planetary level, but there were still colonies waiting for similar improvements. Each region presented unique challenges, but Ethan was ready to face them head-on. With leaders like Claire inspiring others and workers finally receiving the recognition they deserved, Stellar Horizon could continue leading the way toward a brighter future. As he gazed out the window at the rising sun, Ethan felt a renewed sense of purpose. The journey wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for the first time in years, he felt hopeful. Hopeful for Claire, for her children, and for everyone else counting on Stellar Horizon to guide them forward. And so, with determination burning in his chest, Ethan turned back to his work, ready to face whatever came next.